This is Pale Waves. They are quickly becoming one of the most interesting and talked about bands of 2018. Earlier this year, they were top 5 finalists in BBC's New Sound of 2018. So far in their short careers, they have sellout tours, millions of streams, and a cultishly loyal fan base. They could be your next musical obsession. But here's the thing. The band are splitting opinions across the board for one simple reason. Pale Waves are unoriginal. Or at least that's the criticism. They are just taking the best bits of sad British 80s pop and throwing up uninspired facsimiles. Their sound incorporates bits of The Cure, Tears for Fears, the Couture Twins, and The Smiths, all wrapped up in bubble goth clothing. But the other way to look at it is this. Pale Waves are a breath of fresh air, being one of the few guitar-centric acts to break through in the last couple of years. For those that are keeping track, this is important. That nostalgic sound is to be welcomed in an era dominated by synthetic pop and an overabundance of Drake. But what's the deal? Are Pale Waves simply a pale copy of the 80s? Pale Waves formed after a chance meeting between drummer Kira Doran and vocalist-songwriter Heather Barron-Gracie in a Manchester late-night off-license. The two quickly became inseparable and spent the next 2 years hanging out and intermittently writing songs. They then enlisted bassist Charlie Wood and second guitarist Hugo Silvani to move their endeavours from bedroom-based pipe dream to functional band, taking influence from the darker, dreamier side of 80s pop music. The foursome recorded some demos, including future singles The Tide and Heavenly, catching the attention of indie label Dirty Hits. The label had previous success with Wolf Alice, The Japanese House, and The 1975. The connection to the latter has flavoured Pale Waves' career ever since, having toured extensively with the indie pop group, as well as having their first 2 singles produced by the 1975's frontman, Matt Healy. Pale Waves released their debut EP, All the Things I Never Said, in February. But what about that contentious sound? Their uptight basswork and jangly yet swooning guitars mark them out as something remarkably different in today's musical climate. The band pull ideas from the past and mix them together to create something greater than the sum of its parts. Just listen to My Obsession, a mix of Just Like Heaven guitar mixed over a Boys of Summer skeleton. You can almost hear the cassette deck whir. But Pale Waves are far from the first band this decade to crib copiously from the 1980s. Just over the last few years, we've had bands like Haim, whose output is a genius synthesis of thriller-era R&B and Fleetwood Mac. Can you hear me calling out your name? Together we saw the end inside. And Churches, whose career seems to be just a modern update of 80s synth pop like New Order and especially Depeche Mode. Probably the most assured melding of 80s influence is in Pale Waves' Mentors, the 1975. Songs like Somebody Else are a satisfying melting pot of Tears for Fears and soundtrack behemoths Tangerine Dream. And they're not the only ones. Foles, Paramore, Tegan and Sara, and even Carly Rae Jepsen have taken bits and pieces of that decade and incorporated it into their sound. Recreating the 80s is very on trend at the moment. Just look at the success of It, Stranger Things and Glow. This has a fair bit to do with what's known as the 30-year cycle. Simply put, it takes about 30 years for the youth of any era to become the driving force of media production. As Patrick Metzger states in his article, The Nostalgia Pendulum, a rolling 30-year cycle of pop culture trends. The art and culture of their childhood help them achieve comfort and clarity in their world, and so they make art that references that culture and may even exist wholly within that universe. This is why Back to the Future goes back to the 1950s, and The Wonder Years reminisces about the 1960s. But here's the thing, Pale Waves aren't old enough to have lived through the 80s the first time around. They are making this music not as a nostalgic shadow, but because these are the influences they have grown up with. With the online availability of music, any era can be your sonic adolescence. Is it a bad thing? No. They are adding historical layers of texture to their shimmering pop nuggets. All music is influenced by other music. Just because a band is taking a look backwards doesn't mean they don't have a future. Iconic radio DJ John Peel once said about first hearing the Smiths, "I was impressed because unlike most bands, you couldn't immediately tell what records they'd been listening to. That's fairly unusual, very rare indeed. Most other bands need their introductory learning period, where they haven't quite got their sound worked out. If you listen to Nirvana's Bleach, it's way darker and more confrontational than what would make them famous on Nevermind. Bass-heavy songs like Blue sound almost identical to the Melvins, one of the bands that Kurt looked up to in his local scene. Even The Cure, when they started, sounded like a jumbled mess of their punk rock inspirations than their own band. Pale Waves are now at the beginning of their musical careers, so of course their influences are still very obvious and surface level. They are a talented young band, currently buoyanted by a wave of hype and expectation. Their debut full-length is still to be released. With a little more time, they will build on their sound and become a little less 80s band, and a little more Pale Waves. But right now, just enjoy what they've done so far, and be very excited for what is to come. Thanks for watching. If you liked it, like, comment and subscribe. If you really liked it, maybe consider supporting me on Patreon, like these wonderful people here. I'll be back next week with an actual new video. See you then.